Welcome to our Wednesday afternoon study group. There's a lot to cover today, so we may be going a few minutes over time. I'll begin where we left off last week. We were talking about the melting pot. We were talking about how our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents all came to this country coming from Europe perhaps, or from other different parts of the world. And yet the pressure to melt together, to become part of this melting pot, so to say. I'll start with a cute story. It's a joke. Grandma Finkelstein, she's a new immigrant to the United States. She's traveling on a train from New York to Washington, D.C., and she had to make a connection in Philadelphia. Well, she didn't read English well, so she mistakenly got on a connecting train heading right back to New York, not to Washington, D.C. On the train, she meets someone that she recognizes, and they begin to have a conversation. And the friend tells her that she's heading to New York. When she returns to her seat, Mrs. Finkelstein, she remarks in amazement, "What a country America is. Two people could be on the exact same train. One's going to Washington and the other's going to New York." Today, when we hear the word tribalism, we think of it as primitive, as an archaic phenomenon. Tribalism is seen as the cause of disharmony, of petty fighting, major conflict perhaps. And yet, in the text of the Torah, as we have been studying, there's so much of a focus on the tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, each individual tribe. The Torah seems to embrace the idea of pride in your own tribe. The Torah instructs each of the 12 tribes of Israel to be counted separately, a separate census for each tribe, to have their own designated space when the nation camped in the wilderness, where each tribe camped. Each tribe was to carry their own flag. Their own flag had a specific emblem. It had its own color. It was distinct from the other tribe. As the text says, the children of Israel shall encamp, each man by his own camp and each man by his own flag. Stay with your tribe. But why create an intentional division within a single people? Why institute a mitzvah that I have to remain with my tribe, in my own space, in my own location, with my own unique flag? Doesn't the Torah talk so much about unity, about one single united nation chosen by God as his people to be ambassadors of holiness to our world? And yet it seems to be advocating division by so much of a focus on individual tribes. The same Torah that says you shall love your fellow as you love yourself seems to be implanting seeds of what I would call tribal disharmony, of conflict. This tribe is here, this tribe is there. And this idea of the tribalism really pervades much of Torah. From the moment Jacob has the 12 tribes, we find this reference to the tribes being separate. Even the story of the splitting of the sea, the commentaries tell us that the sea didn't split in one tunnel, so to say, for the Jewish people to go through. It created 12 different pathways so that each tribe had their own splitting of the sea. As I mentioned, each tribe was counted separately, a separate census for each tribe. Each had its own stone on the breastplate of the high priest. The high priest had a breastplate, and it had 12 stones, each stone representing a different tribe. As I mentioned, each tribe had their own flag, their own designated place in line when they journeyed through the desert. 12 spies were sent into the land of Canaan. Why 12? Because each tribe needs to be represented. So much of a focus about each tribe individually. And it didn't end in the wilderness. Once they got into the land of Israel, each tribe was given their own allotted territory in their own particular location. Each tribe was focused on their talents, on their skills, on their personality, and on their characteristic. Wouldn't it have been better to underscore the unity of the Jewish people, the harmony of the Jewish people, if we just simply said it's all one? Why does the Torah so much focus on tribal divisions? Anytime someone is mentioned in the Bible, it tells us what tribe he came from. Why not have that melting pot of Jewish identity in which all tribes melt into a single unit, carrying one flag, following one beat, and becoming one nation united under God? Yet it is this message that is articulated thousands of years ago, the idea of there being these individual tribes, which took America a long time to appreciate and to internalize. And we, the second and the third and the fourth generation of American Jews, have borne the consequence, perhaps, of the sad mistake that was so prevalent in the early years of the 20th century. Let's focus on the United States for a moment. For a long time, the United States of America was defined, as we spoke last week, as the melting pot of ethnic minorities. This metaphor that was called the melting pot was used to describe the ideal process of immigration, that the immigrant must allow himself to be melted into formless liquid and then molded into the American way of life. That was the idea of the melting pot. The melting pot was you put all different pieces of metal in this pot, you brought it to this high heat, and everything melted. And once everything melts, it's all just liquid. You mix it all together, and when it comes out, it's one. So the idea was, let's take all of these immigrants and let's melt them together, and we're going to come out with one. Just as in the crucible, many different and diverse materials become one chunk of metal, America was this opportunity for all minorities to reinvent themselves and become just like everyone else. And many immigrants, including and especially many Jews, embraced this model. Enough of the separation of Europe, enough of the shtetl life in Europe. Let's just become one beautiful country, one America, and all of us just melting together and becoming one. And so you may have heard this, that many people left their tefillin on Ellis Island when they came into this country. They took their religious articles and they left it there. How many pairs of tefillin were left on Ellis Island by Jews wanting to just melt into this one country? They left their Shabbos behind. They left their kashrut in the shtetl. They left the idea of a Jewish education for their children. They left it behind. Instead, they wanted to pursue the American dream, as we called it, the golden Medina, the country of gold. Where did this term melting pot come from? It was actually coined by a Jew. His name was Yisrael Zangwill, and then he changed it from Yisrael to Israel Zangwill. He lived in 1864. He was born in 1864. He was from a British-born son of Jewish immigrants. His parents were from Latvia and from Poland. And Zangwill was a staunch advocate of emancipation and assimilation. And Zangwill wrote a play, and he named the play The Melting Pot. That's where the name came from a play written by a Jew. And that play, The Melting Pot, was a big hit in the United States in the year 1908. What was the play about? The hero of the play, David, immigrates to America in the wake of the 1903 Kishinev pogrom. In this pogrom, David's entire family is wiped out. They're all killed. David is the lone survivor. And David writes a symphony called The Crucible, expressing his hope for a world in which all ethnicity melts away, that there's no more ethnics. Everyone is the same, and we all just melt away. And in this play that Zangwill wrote, David, the hero of the play, falls in love. He falls in love with a Russian Christian immigrant. Her name was Vera. And the dramatic peak of the play is the moment when David meets Vera's father. Because Vera's father happens to be the Russian officer responsible for the murder of David's family in Kishinev. He recognized him, the guy that wiped out his family. That's the father of the daughter he falls in love with. And in this play, Vera's father admits his guilt, and David forgives him, and the symphony is performed to accolades, and David and Vera live happily ever after, or at least agree to wed as soon as the curtain falls, when they promise each other that they're going to get married. In Zangwill's words, America is God's crucible, the great melting pot where all the races of Europe are melting and reforming. Germans and Frenchmen and Irishmen and Englishmen, Jews and Russians, all into one crucible, and we're all in one melting pot, and we're going to come out all just one. When the play, The Melting Pot, opened in Washington, D.C., the date was October the 5th of 1909. The President of the United States at the time, Theodore Roosevelt, attended the play. And when the play was over, he stood up and he yelled out, "That was a great play, Mr. Zangwill. That's a great play." Zangwill was writing as a Jew who no longer wanted to be a Jew. His real hope was for a world in which the entire lexicon of racial and religious differences is thrown away. And consistent to his own philosophy, he broke off his support for Zionism, and he actually marries a non-Jewish woman in real life. Zangwill's Melting Pot captured the sentiments of countless Jewish immigrants to America at the time. Sad. They felt they needed to bid farewell to their Jewish identity and become American as possible. The sacred ideal was for all people to be the same. On the altar of this sacred ideal, generations of Jews sacrificed their 3 millennium-long faith and tradition, because these would only serve to cause divisiveness and conflict. It wouldn't give their children the opportunity to find true happiness in America. That was the thought. That was the dream. That was the philosophy. But it was wrong. And it didn't work. And yes, President Theodore Roosevelt was wrong. It wasn't a great play. It was a tragic play. It was short-sighted, and it was self-destructive, because it contributed to the climate which caused millions of Jews to sever their cords of thousands of years of history to their own Jewish identity and to the living well springs of Jewish faith and practice. Many of them assimilated and have been lost to our people. The melting pot theory was wrong, not only from a Jewish and religious point of view, but also from a purely American point of view, because it didn't quite understand what the founding fathers had in mind with the term United States. We were made up of different states functioning as one united country. Unity, which is achieved through the obliteration of diversity and the culture of the minority, is superficial and short-lived. You don't squash the traditions of your people. You don't squash the culture of your people. You don't squash the religion, the faith of your people in order to become one. It's like in a marriage. If your love is based, as it often is in the early stages of romance before you grow up and reality kicks in, on the belief that you're similar and almost identical, it's prone to disintegration. And the moment you realize that your husband or your wife has shtick and mishigas and all of their own, all of a sudden, oy vey. Marriage is not about two exact people becoming one. A good marriage encompasses diversity, that we're different, and yet we become one. They appreciate the other's truth, their other's differences, and we learn to become one. And that's the same in all relationships, including the relationships between cultures and nations and civilizations. You don't squash one's own personality and characteristics in the name of unity. That's not unity. Diversity is sewn into the very fabric of existence. Think about it. That's the way God created the world. We are diverse. No two human beings are alike. No two snowflakes are alike. There are tens of millions of different species of plants and animals in the world. That's the way God created the world. And there are inherent divisions between people, such as male and female, body and soul, divisions within natures and cultures and individuals. We don't foster unity by denying diversity, but by recalling that our diversity can engender yet a deeper unity. It's like a symphony. If everyone is playing the same notes, if everyone's playing the same instrument, it's pretty boring. No one's going to that show. The beauty of the symphony is that the conductor is able to put together that there are various different instruments and they're playing perhaps the same notes, but on different instruments, and therefore the sounds are not exactly the same. But when played together, wow, it was something special. That's the beauty of the United States, that we can come together although we're different. And that's the message that the Torah gives forth thousands of years ago. The very same verse which instructs each tribe to camp in its own designated place with its own flag states one more thing, that the children of Israel shall encamp, each man by his section with the flags of their father's house, facing the sanctuary all around shall they encamp. So although each family was to camp separately around their tribe, their flag, in the center of all of the tribes stood the sanctuary. That's where the Mishkan, that's where the tabernacle was. And that was built by all the Jewish people together. So the divine is right in the middle. And we each have equal distance to our faith in the middle. Yes, we're going to live within our tribe, but our focus is all going to be the same. How do we serve God? All 12 tribes were positioned at an equal distance from the sanctuary. So they were like in a circle. And the nucleus of the camp, its core and its foundation, was the tabernacle of God. And in that regard, every tribe was equal. And that's we have this image of the coexistence between diversity and unity. The unity of the Jewish people is not to be confused with the idea that we're all the same. We don't have to obliterate our own individual journey and experience in order to be part of the unity of the Jewish people. Now, that was the mistake of the construction of the Tower of Babel early on in history, where it was one language, one people, and everyone had to be on exactly the same page. Not so in the construction of the Jewish community. Here, God wants each tribe to have a different flag, to speak its own voice, to sing its own note, to paint in its own color, as long as the Jewish people, in all of their diverse pathways, have their eyes fixed at the epicenter, God's tabernacle and the ark with the Torah contained in it, then our divergent flags only enrich our collective identity. Diversity within the Jewish people is not only a factor we must accept, it's a cause for genuine celebration. It grants us the opportunity to discover the sparks of truth experienced in the heart of the other. I want to learn from the other because I'm not exactly the same. I'm still going to be me. But I open my mind and I open my heart and I open my soul to understand that there are others and there's room for others. When the Red Sea parted to allow the Jews passage, it split, as I mentioned, into 12 pathways, one for each tribe. The 12 pathways were divided by what they said was a translucent wall of water. What does that mean? As I'm going through my tribe's splitting of the sea, I see the others. I see the others means I respect the others. I appreciate the pathways of the other tribes as well. We just celebrated the holiday of Shavuot yesterday and the day before. And we stood at Sinai to receive the Torah as one single nation. This gives us the perspective on the nature of Jewish identity and our relationship to the Torah. We all share one covenant, one Torah that comes from one God. And yet each of us are different. And we each experience that voice of God in our own way, with our own individual heart, with our own soul, with our own consciousness. We're not exactly the same, but we all heard the word of God at Sinai. And we interpret it within our own personality, within our own lives, within the stage of life that God put us on. Ultimately, the United States of America matured. And in the 1960s, the melting pot model began to be challenged and overthrown. And as we spoke in the past, a new model emerged called multiculturalism. This approach held that society was a mosaic of different groups and their ways of life, none of which held primacy over the other. It's not that there's one more important than the other. And it encouraged minorities to celebrate their past and their individual culture, and through them to contribute to the diversity and color of the United States. A new resurfacing of Jewish culture and religious identity started taking place as well. And we all experience it. We all feel it. The very fact that we're all coming together to study Torah every week. All of those that are listening right now, that will listen in the days on the other social media networks that we put the classes on, we all come from different backgrounds. We're not the same. We have different upbringings, different perhaps religious affiliations, and yet Torah is the center core. We are united one people, even though we're different. That's the beauty of Judaism. We don't have to be exactly the same. And that ultimately was the beauty of the United States finding their way to say, celebrate your culture. Don't give it away. Don't let it melt away. Only with that larger transcendental vision, with a deep commitment to God, that we transcend any individual person, party, or culture. That's when we form the true one mosaic, the true oneness. That we could be on the same train, one going to New York, one going to Washington at the very same time. I want to do the last 3 verses of the chapter 10 of the book of Deuteronomy. We'll go through them quickly. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the holiday of Shavuot and what's going on in Israel. So as I mentioned, I may go a little over time today. For those of you that were with me on the holiday of Shavuot, some of this is what I spoke about in Shul, so forgive me for some of the themes being repeated. But for now, let me share the screen, 3 verses that we'll read together. Verse number 20, you shall fear the Lord your God, worship him and cleave to him and swear by his name. He is your praise and he is your God, who did these great and awesome things for you, which your eyes have seen. With 70 souls your forefathers descended to Egypt, and now the Lord your God has made you as the stars of heaven in abundance. So Moses is telling the Jewish people, you have to look at what we have become in such a short period of time. Look at the miracle of who we are. This is going back to him as he's standing at the edge of the Jordan River. The Jewish people are about to cross, and he says, look, just a few hundred years ago, we were just this family, this exiled family with just 70 people. And look what we have become. Well, if Moses was writing that today, think about it for a moment. It's not just 210 years later. Now it's 3,333 years from Sinai. 2 days ago was the anniversary, was the birthday, 3,333 years. The threes are wild. 3,333. And this fledgling nation of former slaves, less than 2 months old, gathers at the foot of a humble mountain in the Sinai wilderness to experience this unprecedented event in human history. God himself communicating with an entire nation made up of men, women, and children face to face, not just to an individual prophet, not just to a Moses, not just to an Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, but to all of the Jewish people. And from that day forward, we were a changed people. No longer just a family that suffered and celebrated together, but a people with a mission. We were given a mandate to illuminate the world with the light of godliness, the light of goodness through the teachings of Torah and its commandments. 3,333 years. And yes, we've gone through our difficult times with pogroms and persecutions, and difficult times with assimilation, as we spoke about the early 20th century. But today, I think it's time for us to take a pause and to think about if Moses was to write that sentence today. I think that Moses would say to us, to our people, to the descendants of those who stood at Sinai, that we should give ourselves a standing ovation because we made it. We did it. 3,000 years later, we're still practicing Judaism. Judaism is still alive and well. Not 210 years later, not 40 years later, 3,333 years later. There was this group of bat mitzvah girls that met with the former chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau. Rabbi Lau is a world-renowned orator, and one of the girls asked him, said, soon I'm going to have my bas mitzvah and I am going to have to speak at this event, and I'm shy. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to get over my fear of speaking. And I see that you, Rabbi, you speak all over the world with such confidence. How do you overcome the fear of speaking? And Rabbi Lau responded. And he said, you're right. I stand in front of a lot of people, a lot of famous people. I stand in front of the Pope. I stood in front of Gorbachev. I stood even in front of Castro. I stand in front of presidents of all countries, leaders of Europe, of the United Nations. Let me tell you where I get my strength from. When I stand up to speak, I remind myself that I'm not speaking and standing alone. From my throat comes forth the words that have been spoken for over 300 generations by a people who saw it all and survived it all. I don't speak for myself. And this nation of mine that has spoken to the world for 300 generations never changed its ideology, never gave it up for another ideology. They watched throughout history as nations such as Ammon and Moab and Assyria and Babylonia and Persia and Greece and Rome. These nations came and went. And it's interesting, these nations, they didn't endure a Spanish expulsion. They didn't endure an Inquisition. They didn't endure an Auschwitz that targeted them. And yet they're still not here anymore. And we who have gone through it all, who have been through it all, who have been the victims of so many of these nations, we're still here stronger than ever. So when I get up to speak, that's what I think about. I remind myself of who I'm representing. I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for a train of generations that take me all the way back to Sinai. And that's what gives me the confidence to speak. So I asked my audience on the first day of Shavuos, and by the way, the shul was packed to capacity. I haven't had such a crowd since Yom Kippur this past year. It was beautiful to see people coming back to life. Baruch Hashem, it should continue that way. I asked if you ever thought about which story of the Bible fascinates you the most to the point that you wish you were there, you wish you were part of that people, part of that generation. Or which of the biblical heroes or the Jewish history heroes do you think about so much? Do we have within our existence today Abraham-like people, Moses-like people, King David, Isaiah's, Jeremiah's, Rabbi Akiva's, Rashi's, Maimonides, Baal Shem Tov's, these great heroes? What about us? When we think about the times of the Maccabees, how much we wish we could have been a Maccabee. You know, we have plays about the Maccabees. We have jelly donuts on Hanukkah, and we think about the miracle of Hanukkah. There's so much tradition that we're talking about what they experienced. What about us? Wouldn't it be great to see the Maccabees ourselves? Think about the Jews that crossed the sea and the level of spirituality they must have been at when they witnessed this miracle. Are we and they the same people? Are we that kingdom of princes and a holy nation that the Torah talks about? Is a Jewish student today that walks on the campus of Oxford University or Harvard University or Ohio State or any university in our country or throughout the world, are they the same Jew that ate manna and served in the Holy Temple? Is a Jew living today in Agora Hills or any community that you're from that works hard to make their ends meet? Are we the same Jew whom God calls the chosen people? Are we the chosen people today to whom God gave this mandate? Are we still the people of eternity, or are we just celebrating the past? Are we just looking back at there used to be once upon a time? What about us? What about us? Who are we? What role are we playing? Now, this is a talk that really deserves a lot more attention than I'm going to give it today. But I just want to bring out this point. When you read the news today, and you see that which has happened for 3,333 years ago, that started at a mountain at Sinai. And I realize that the Sinai experience is just as relevant today as it was back then, maybe even more. For 10 days now, Hamas has sent over 3,000 rockets raining down on Israeli cities. If not for Israel's Iron Dome, these rockets, each one of them, they would have reduced the country to rubble and murdered thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. So don't think because 90% are being caught by the Iron Dome that the desire for destruction by Hamas is not there. 3,000 rockets can do a lot of damage, and it's not over yet. And these rockets are being launched by Islamic Jihad, by Hamas. Hamas have controlled the Gaza Strip since Israel unilaterally withdrew from it, and forcibly Israel alone evacuated every last Jewish resident from their territory in 2005. They dragged Jews out of their own homes in order to give the Gaza to the Palestinians to create, hopefully, what would have been what they thought would be a beautiful environment for the Palestinian people to live. But it wasn't that way. The dream of 2005 or the strategy of 2005 has backfired. Hamas and Islamic Jihad are genocidal terrorist organizations that want to wipe Israel, a country the size of New Jersey, that contains the largest Jewish community on earth, off the map. That's their reason for being, and they don't hide it. They say it openly. It's part of their charter. They write, there is no solution for the Palestinian question except through jihad. They clearly want to wipe Israel off the map. If we think this battle is bad, chas v'shalom, just wait. We have 100,000 missiles pointing at us coming from Lebanon by Hezbollah. Last week, a senior Hamas official asked Palestinians that live in Israel to go out and take 5 shekels. He said, buy yourselves a knife, and each one must chop off the head of one Jew. That's what they want. And yet the oddity, the world is attacking Israel, of course, for retaliating, and I love this word, disproportionately, as though Israel was trying to attack them rather than protect its citizens from utter destruction. And because Israel is knocking out tunnels now, which is where they hide, which is where they keep their missiles, which is where they use for all their terrorist attacks, and Israel is literally systematically wiping out this whole tunnel, as they call the metro, and yet the world is condemning Israel. And you need to hear this from me. You know it yourselves, the frustrations you feel by seeing some of the marches going on in our country and throughout the world. It's utterly sickening. It's sickening. The Hamas sacrifices its children on the altar of jihad. They launch rockets from amidst civilian populations, knowing that Israel must try to stop them, and thus inadvertently causing the death of Arab children. They're doing it, they're killing their own children, and yet the world and social media buys into this sadistic cynicism of Hamas and Israel, and Israel is painted as the Nazis. Israel is the bad one. The hate to Israel and the Jew has not abated. But what does this show? It shows me this. After thousands of years, and as I mentioned, 3,333 years, the Jew hasn't lost any of his power, any of his youthful vigor, any of his potency, because we still arouse in our very existence the same animosity, the same insane mad hate towards us. Why? It seems clear that that same unique holiness that was represented by the Jew for thousands of years is still in full tact today. Each and every one of you, as secular and as unaffiliated as you may see yourself, you are a walking piece of godliness. You are a walking, breathing miracle of history and a shining spiritual light on the whole world. And that's why you trigger such hate in the hearts of evil, because evil cannot stand holiness. Evil cannot stand goodness. If we weren't good and we weren't holy and we weren't doing our job, they wouldn't hate us. They wouldn't be sending missiles our way. Evil hates goodness. So when you see who our enemies are, it tells you that we're doing something right. That the purity and holiness of the Jewish people is still in full might. That the holiness of Sinai has not abated. That our role in history has not been dimmed even a bit. We are as important today as the Maccabees were in their days. We are as important today as Mordechai and Esther in the story of Purim. We are as important today as King David. We are as important today as Samuel the prophet. You pick any time throughout history of Jewish history and the great leaders that we had. And I tell you, we are as important today as we were at any point during our history. And I know it because they still hate us so. Because evil hates us so. I just saw literally right before class this post. There was an Israeli within Israel beaten by an Arab mob. He passed away yesterday from the wounds that he suffered a few days before. And his family donated his organs to save other people. Amongst those saved by his organs were Arab citizens of Israel. You tell me, what kind of people are we? We are a holy people. We are a good people. We are a kind people. We are fulfilling our mission of being a light unto the nations. We haven't stopped for 3,000 years, even though the world handcuffed us. The world threw us into gas chambers, and we didn't stop, and we won't stop. And we continue to rebuild, and we rebuild Jewish community after Jewish community, synagogue after synagogue, day school after day school, soup kitchen after soup kitchen. And we have given. And we have given not just to our own, but we have given to society. We have contributed to society, contributed to the whole world, and continue to do so, and will continue to do so. And that's why we're hated so much. The holiness of Sinai has not abated. We, 14 million people, less than 1/4% of humanity, less than 1/4%. And we're still at the center stage of humanity. We're still right there. Because we have a divine mission to change the world. Because we have a divine mission to bring about the coming of Mashiach, the coming of Messiah, to introduce a consciousness of oneness to the world, to introduce a consciousness of love to the world, of goodness and kindness. The Torah and Yiddishkeit and Judaism are still as powerful as ever. Its role in history as urgent as ever. We are at the vortex of civilization. We're battling evil. We're battling genocide. We're fighting for decency and compassion and truth. So this is a time for all of us to get stronger, get prouder, be more involved in your Yiddishkeit, not less. Don't be afraid to wear your kippah in public. Wear it in public. Don't be afraid to stand up proud and tall for who you are, because you're not just yourself, you're representing 3,333 years, and we're getting stronger every single day. Morris Samuel remarked that no man loves his alarm clock. No one likes their alarm clock because it wakes you up in the morning. You're in the middle of a good schluff, you're sleeping, you're having a good dream, and all of a sudden the alarm clock goes off. Thank God they created the snooze button, right? The Jewish people have been chosen to serve as the alarm clock of civilization. That's what a Jew is. We are an alarm clock. We are the person who, in his or her very presence, is a living, walking ambassador of God, of truth, of moral truth. A Jew walking down the street is a breathing miracle. Think about it. Every one of us is a breathing miracle. All miracles of the Bible pale in comparison to the miracle of Jewish survival, to the miracle that you're here right now. Because you as a Jew, you have survived destructions, exiles, pogroms, inquisitions, holocausts, and endless wars, and assimilation. We are the greatest living proof that there is a God in this world, that history is a moral narrative. The Jew, by his or her just existence, reminds 7 billion people that the world is not a jungle, and that we're all going to have to answer for ourselves and for our actions after our sojourn here on earth. So the same Jew who stood at Sinai 3,333 years ago is alive and well today. And we're going strong, and we're getting stronger every single day. Am Yisrael Chai. Chai in the truest sense of the word. Chai with pride, chai with strength, chai with vigor, chai with optimism for the future. Let us pray that the modern day Maccabees, every one of the chayalim, the men and women, the brave men and women, the soldiers of Tzahal, the soldiers of Eretz Yisrael, of the IDF, that God protect them, that God watch over them, that God send success in their ways. And let us hope and pray that every single citizen living in Eretz Yisrael is protected by the Iron Dome and by God's dome. Protect our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Let's stand strong together. Let us be united, even though we're not the same, as we spoke about earlier today. And let us merit to see open and revealed miracles, as we have seen, as we will continue to see. Ad bios Mashiach Tzidkenu, until the day in which there will be no more evil in the world, with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, which should happen speedily in our days. One final note, if I may. Our annual gala, we always have our gala in June. Most of the times it's at the Four Seasons Hotel. This year we're doing a virtual gala. Hopefully next year we will be back at the Four Seasons all together, celebrating the annual campaign and also celebrating coming back together again. But for this year, we're going to do a magnificent virtual gala. Everyone's able to watch it all over the world. It'll be on June 9th, 7 p.m. Pacific time. We have a wonderful lineup. We have entertainers coming virtually from all over the world. Tony Orlando will be joining us as well. Dudu Fisher will be singing for us. So many others. It's going to be a fantastic evening. Dennis Prager will say a few words, Michael Medved, Joseph Telushkin. It's going to be a fabulous evening. So please do mark the date on your calendar, June 9th, 7 p.m. You'll go to chabadgala.com and you'll be able to watch it. In conjunction with our annual gala is our annual fundraising campaign. If you've already contributed, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support means everything to me. It's what allows us to do all the work that we do. And during this past year, there have been unfortunately many that needed to rely on us for their monthly rent, for their food, for everything that they needed for their families, and we couldn't say no to anyone. And it's only because of you, because you're there for us. So please take a moment, right when this class ends, which will be just in a moment, go to chabadgala.com and make a pledge of anything that you'd like to contribute over the next 12 months at any of your pace that you would like to give it over a 12-month period. Make a pledge for tzedakah for us. The tzedakah will go to good deeds for your mitzvah of tzedakah that will stand in good stead. Everyone have a wonderful week. I look forward to seeing you Monday evening at 7:30 for Biblical Reflections. And next Wednesday, we're going to continue in our studies of the book of Deuteronomy. Take care, everybody.